What if I raise funding and the startup fails? Does the investor ask for refund? How much equity should I dilute? Is there any government schemes for startup funding in India? Welcome Rohit to the Startup Bazaar show. Right. Let me introduce Rohit to all the startup audience. Right. Rohit is a fundraiser, an investment banker, and a founder as well. He really raised seed round and Series A for many startups, and he will raise a lot of them in future as well. So Rohit, introduce yourself to the audience.
Yes, so well, basically, I'm from Bangalore, and my major focus is towards understanding what different startup ideas, trying to have a guiding them in terms of what should be the major focus in terms of when they are ready for investment. How should they pitch to an investor? What the investor looks in terms of startup, and what is the market they need to approach, because every startup has the idea of there will be a unique idea. It might be a bit different from the
Right.
existing company, or it might be a bit
Mm,
similar, but
mm,
it's just the idea what matters, and modeling that idea in terms of being ready for the market is something what a startup founder needs to be ready with. And I assist in terms of what should be done, and which type of investor should they approach, what type of or what is the round of funding they should be looking for in terms of their 3 years or 5 years of runway, what they would be requiring, what should be the equivalent amount of equity to be diluted and all.
that's really great, Rohit. You are helping a lot of startups in your journey. So basically, we have created some few questions, right, from our audience, right? Let's start from the first question. The first question is, when should a startup raise funding?
Well, that's a good question. For a startup, we can categorize it into three stages. One is this idea stage,
Mm,
where once the idea is made, he can actually approach to investors with the idea, in the idea phase, and raise funds through that process. And other is where his product or his service is in the beta version, where the product is not yet out in the market, but he has the plan of or the blueprint of what should be the product be. And that is where the fundraising process goes on in the beta stage too, or it's morely called as pre-seed stage.
yes,
And
yes, yes.
we have another stage which nothing but the product is out and there is revenue being generated through that product or service of the company, and that becomes our seed or a series A stage of where the company can raise funds.
Right. Actually, from that prototype, the funding first process starts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, great. So next question is, right, what the first thing investor or you look in the startups before investing?
Okay. So as an investor,
Mm,
the first thing is idea about
mm,
what is the idea of the startup, what difference is it making in the market, and will it be successful or not. And the second team comes towards the founder and his team, because although the idea is generated, it is the founder and his teams who make it successful. So it is equal amount of importance whether founder can do it or not, his team can do it or not, and he is he able to implement it. So it is an investor looks majorly whether there is the potential in terms of that founder and his background to make it successful, make it work.
yeah, like the team makes the dream work, right? Team
Yes.
the most. Great, great. So there's a very like every startup come to us and say we need funding, right? So basically they all are in the early stage startup. So is early stage startup funding is drying up?
Yeah, well, early stage startup, there are many investors, there are many VCs who are looking for early stage investments, investment required companies, because as an individual, as an investor, he definitely looks in terms of, say, early stage startup, because that is where an investor gets opportunity to know more about the company operations, to know more about how should the startup be different, because in the later stage, if he's associated and if there are any modifications to be done, it cannot be done at that particular time. And in the early stages where an investor experience in terms of mentoring the startup actually works. And there are many VCs who actually involved in early stage. Like we know that Y Combinator is the platform who have you know quite the potential of selecting startups and providing early stage. We have various Indian Angel Network, or even the Lumis partners. We have many VCs who
Yeah,
associate with startups and make it work.
right. Actually, yeah, early stage startup funding is very risky as well. So a lot of investors doesn't like
Yeah.
take that risk. So they should. So that's great. We'll move to the next question, which is really you have already answered it, but still it's a question in the book, right? What is the more important thing, idea or funding?
Yeah, so I would say it is equally important, both the aspects, because
Right,
without idea, funding is of waste. And without funding, how can the idea be implemented?
right, right.
So it is equally important for an startup founder or the team to focus on idea and its implementation through the funds provided by the investor.
Hmm. Basically, like both interdependent, right?
Yes, both are interdependent.
Dependent, right? So actually, here is the one question that really asks a lot. How do you improve the odds of getting your startup funded?
Okay, so this we can answer in a way like, for a startup founder, it is important for him to understand what is his idea, what should be the target where he should be making of, like target market, target customers, what is he building.
Hmm.
Once he himself is clear with the idea, and that is where he should approach towards right type of investors. Because if you're into an commodity based startup, you cannot approach a tech or gaming investors for this. So he should understand what either is his target investors.
Hmm.
And another thing is important is like the team of his team is important of building the experience in the background.
Yesterday, Rohit, I was talking to investor, and he said कि B2B SaaS is that the trend investor investing in, right? The B2B SaaS market. Is it like really investor interested in B2B SaaS?
Yes, interesting question. So what happens over here is like, we see in the market that there is B2C, everything is customer oriented services to be provided in terms of even the SaaS product. But it is now the time to have the SaaS product and digitizing everything for the B2B market too. And this is the right time for that type of product to get into the market.
Mhm. Right. So next question is, Rohit, is there any government schemes for startup funding in India?
Yes, there are many government schemes for startups. Like we can talk about Startup India seed funding, a major thing which many of the Indian startups look for. And apart from which, we can take example of NABARD, where it focuses through to investment of into agricultural commodities, because
Mm,
government has many of advantages in terms of agri commodities. And we government even has focus in terms of women empowerment. So there are many VCs who are associated, who look for founders who are women of many startups and provides funding and mentoring for them. And we even have credit guarantee trust fund. It majorly provides small amount of credit for MSMEs, basically used for short term capital, which we can be called. So government does affiliate to startups in terms of promoting them for a shorter period of time, and anything associated with the social cause, government is affiliated over there. And in terms of having an impact investments and impact into the society, that is where the angels and VCs and investors come.
let's move to
Yeah,
next question, which is very asked in our comment sections. Can we raise funding through cold email?
definitely, definitely we can. Because investor doesn't have enough time for him
Yeah,
to directly have a conversation with the startups, because there will be many startups waiting up for him.
right.
And he is more actively on either LinkedIn or even the mails. So the best way of approaching a investor is either through LinkedIn or directly find the mail ID and mail him your idea. Maybe just a
Mm,
glance to catch his attention. And
mm,
if you are able to grab his attention, that is where you get the bigger cake. You get to have a meet with him, impress the person, impress the idea, show yourself, That is where you get the fund.
Right. Great. So the really that confusion in startups is what document they should prepare for before funding. So what document startup needed to raise funding?
So once the investor
Hmm.
agrees in terms of soft commitment providing,
Hmm.
so that is where various documents involve, to which leads to documentation, term sheet, and then the legal documents which has to be signed. Basically, the startup should be ready with his historical revenue, bank statements, all the transactions,
Hmm.
information memorandum of a company, and many more. So basically, what all documents associated with the company to show its fairness in terms of what it is building in the future. And even we would be having the term sheet, which in terms of understanding what are the terms discussed to be promised by the startup in the future way, and what are its acceptance for the investor and the startup. Basically, the agreement process.
Right. So with this question, there's one another question. Is private limited company the only way to raise funding?
Well, once private limited company, once he is able to raise enough funds in terms of scaling up into a IPO stage and goes to becoming a public company, that is a common journey for raising funds. But
Hmm.
apart from a private company, if there is just partnership company or sole companies, sole proprietor. So what they can do is they can have either partners over there, or they can raise funds through loans, government. So in terms of having an investor on board, it should be a private company, private limited.
Okay, it should be a private company. Equity split, right?
Yeah.
Great. So actually, for this session, we have raised a question sticker on Instagram. So these are the few questions that asked from user asked from us. Is very interesting one. First question is, what if I raise funding and the startup fails? Does the investor ask for refund?
No, not actually. Because an investor invests in a startup knowing the risk. It might be successful or it might be fail. But
Mhm.
it is the founder's ethics in terms of whatever he has generated the revenue, equivalent proportion, what he can give it to the investors who have trusted in the business. So that is a portion which an investor can take. But if it fails, that is a loss for the founder and that is a loss for the investor too. And that is where the risk factor comes, and because of which they have certain amount of equity which they take. In terms of when it is successful, they have the profit, and in terms of failure, then yes, they have to pay the loss.
Actually, I was like really searching this question on the core app, and what I found is the investor actually signed some of terms in the term sheet. Like the first thing I will get, first money I will get of the company, like they shut down, first payment will be mine, right? कि जो पैसा मिलेगा वो पहले मेरा होगा, बाद में तुम founders में split होगा. So is it the really
Yeah, it's basically
just
depends on what are the terms and conditions
hmm,
of the investor. Few investors go on non-diluting base of equity, where if they take 10% of equity in the further rounds of funding, also they don't dilute their equity. So it's all depending on what negotiations can a startup founder do with the investor.
okay, right? So the actually recently in recent few years we are seeing many young entrepreneurs in the market, right? So one of them is I'm ask the question. I am 16. Can I raise fund for my startup?
Yes, definitely. Why not? Because when you have an idea and you trust your idea, even though if you are not showing yourself as a major operator, when an investor, if you are able to impress an investor, that is where he comes as managing the company and taking care of the company, and after a certain time is where you can have the hold on the company, you can have the certain amount of equity. So age, yes, if you're 16, yeah, but if you have an idea, you can pitch it to the investors, and that is where they take care of
Actually, problem is that investor doesn't take the 16-year old seriously as well, right? So he think this
it. Yeah.
is a kid, right? He cannot understand the business processes as well. So okay.
So that is where the major managerial part goes through to the investors.
So what the average return does investor expect? Does he wait for the IPO or exit before it?
Yes. So basically, every investor, when he gets into the agreement of funding, his mindset is based on two parts. One is when he is exiting, he would be requiring certain amount of returns for his investments. It might be 5x, it might be 10x, it might be 30x also. And if it is successful, then he would definitely wait for the IPO. Or when he feels that more and more of investments can't be done from his side, that is where he exits to gain back what he's achieving from that company.
Okay, great. So the next question is like really confusing one for the founders. How much equity should I dilute?
Yeah, so good question about that.
Hmm.
Basically, if it depends on the amount of fund you want to raise and the market valuation of your company. Because if the valuation is more, you dilute the lesser amount of equity for a greater fund. And if the valuation is less, for you to raise funds, like let's take an example of your company is valuated around 30 CR and you are looking for raising of 3 CR of fund, you should evaluate approximately 10 to 15% of your equity to evaluate your company at 30 to 25 CR. So it's all on what is your market size, what is your future projections in terms of revenue which you are earning, existing competitor, how are you compared with it, and that is where the valuation is done, and that is where the equity is being given out. It's basically on the founder's perspective of his willing to give how much equity he wants to give, but it should equally be reasonable in terms of for an investor to accept that amount of equity.
Actually, a lot of founders say that 20% equity is safe, right? You should not dilute more than 20% equity to an investor. It's really great or
So what happens here is like if you are in the seed round or pre-seed round, basically many of the founders, in terms of raising more amount of funds, they are ready for even diluting 50 to 20%. And many of them don't have that much idea of what exactly the percentage should be diluted for which the founder should also have the rights and availability for further investments. So I would say that approximate of 10 to 15% for the seed and followed by lower amount of equity should be going on for the further investments.
great answer, Rohit. So let's move on to the next question, which is really about the company formation. I have an LLP, can raise funding.
Sorry?
I have an LLP, limited
Yeah.
liability, right? Can I raise funding?
Well, in that case, you have to make it into the total public private company,
Right,
and that is where you need to go towards funding.
right, great answer. So then there is a small business who are asking, ki, how should I get funding? I'm really small business, right? From like simple shop in my local cities. How should I get funding?
Yes. So when it is a small scale of business, and that was definitely a small scale of funding which you are looking for. And for MSME, government has many opportunities, and many banks provide funding for MSMEs. You have a better schemes where you can look into and raise funds instead of directly pitching towards investors, because investors is a person who would be looking for a greater impact and greater plan.
I,
And when yours is a small business, you can go for a smaller credit loan which you can take with much better schemes provided by government and banks.
great. Actually, I have one question in my mind, Rohit. What is the difference between business and startup? Like, you know,
So we can say that all the startups cannot go until the extent of business. Few startups die at the idea stage itself.
right,
So that actually answers the question. Startup starts with an idea.
right.
Business is where you run the business, you run the show, you gain the revenue.
Hmm. Actually, I read somewhere कि startup वो है जिसका vision बड़ा है, right? Who have a great
Yeah.
teams, and business वो है who just want to be sustainable for like simple shop or like whatever. So basically, I think this is okay. Well, for all of listening us, just take both of the examples as well. Use it.
Yeah.
Great. So the last question from the users Q&A is: I have my prototype ready. How should I look for my startup funding?
Yeah, if your prototype is ready, then definitely you should understand what is the market size you are targeting, what can be the revenue of your prototype being used by the customers, and based on the scale of the market size and growth rate of active acceptance, how easy can the customer accept your prototype product, based on which you can just approach the investors, explain your prototype, give a demo, and if they are okay with it, you show them the growth plan of your prototype, when will it be out. You need to prove it. So there are two types of investors who actually invest in the prototype stage itself, and few invest once the product is out. So you need to approach both of them to understand where exactly are you lacking and how can you be much better, and you get the opportunity to know more about the what an investor looks, and even the opportunity to raise the funds.
Great answer. Rohit. Actually, Rohit, there is one question that I really want to ask from you is, recently we uploaded a reel on Instagram, right? It was about like the after and the before stage of startup, right? They accept they will be like rich and and then there's a depression hits them when they face the failure. So a lot of startups can relate to them, right? And they write in the comment कि पता नहीं अब क्या करूँगा, I have seen the failure, I don't like ना मेरे पास मकसद नहीं रहा जिंदगी का, right? They are writing like that. So how to handle pressure in startup?
So pressure in startup is where the founder is getting all the stress for him.
Yeah.
It's basically the more stress you get, the more challenges you face, the more founder learns. And these learnings should be implemented in the right time in order to make it successful.
Mm.
If a person should, a founder should not give up and seeing 2 or 3 failures, because even in the fundraising process, if you see, you might have spoken to 100 investors, but out of which even one investor, if he converts, that is where you get your success, that someone is trusting your company, someone is trusting your startup. So
Right.
never give up on what you're building until and unless you are totally exhausted. And once you're totally exhausted, give it another try. Approach to other bigger companies who have achieved the same thing. Know the mentoring and do the process.
Like being motivated, right? One
Yeah.
will definitely achieve it. Great. Actually, I always suggest a startup is ki start meditation as well, right? Meditation has a lot of effect in your brain and your body as well. You feel calm all the time. So it really, do you do meditation? Right?
Meditation is a way of telling, having a cool mindset. Few do meditation, few have
Hmm.
a walk or sports.
Right, right.
So it's all on us. What
What
type
about
of stress
observation,
booster
how
we.
you observe your surroundings, right? Yeah.
Totally. If our surrounding is much happier, then what stress we have is nothing in front of the surrounding influence what we have.
Hmm.
Positive vibes is all that matters.
Right. Actually, what I face in recent times, I talk a lot of startup founders. They forget their entire life for an idea, right? They are missing the social life. They are missing the every single thing they can enjoy with the family. They just 24 into 7 in the startup ecosystem, working on their startup. From the third person, it looks like that this man is crazy as well, right? But
True.
I think this is the main reason of a depression for a startup founders. They're not interacting with social peers socially, right? So what do you think about it? Should startup will work 24 into 7, or they should fix a time like 9 to 5 or 9 to 9, whatever?
Frankly, according to me, as there is no time limit for a startup founder to waste on. If he is having the zeal to win it, he never gets sleep. Even in the sleep, he would be dreaming about his startup. So
uh,
it's 24/7 walking.
but actually like they are missing the social life as well. So I can get it ki they are very motivated, but this is the main reason of the depression they are getting, you know.
Well, this depression can later be earned back once you are successful. Everyone,
This
every
is
it's
what
like
they
it's
call it,
there is
right?
a saying. There is a saying. Everyone cheers you up when you are successful. No one knows your pain
Yeah,
when
right.
you are.
Mm. Actually, so founders, listen to this. Take this note on your diary. So get it on your notebook. Great, Rohit. Actually, Rohit, you have answered a lot of questions, right? This will really help a lot of founders as well. So actually, a few questions you have solved my few of answers, right? Maybe कुछ doubt थे इसमें, so you have solved them at all. So when I got this question, what if I raise funding and startup fails? Does the investor ask for refund? I was kind of shocked. Like, does really investor ask for refund or not? And you cleared it up. Like, very great. So, like, what is the closing note for this? No podcast or the show? Like, people will remember it later on. Some advice to founders as an investor, investment banker.
Well, advice to founders is like focus on what you are building, what your idea is. Try to compare it with what is out in the market. Try to make it better, try to make it different every time. Your idea might be built today. If you delay it for another week, your idea might be someone else, prototype. So do not delay what your idea is. Make sure you start the immediate, the day you get your confidence of building it, and never give up in terms of failures, because the more failures, the more you learn. And that is where even after having your first investment or later success, your failures will teach you how to improve more in the business instead of having a failure in the later stage. So never give up, always stay focused. Any taken greater advice from your competitors, are your greatest mentors, when we can say. The
Right,
more you look in terms of competitor, the more you know how is he doing and what he is missing out. That is where you can achieve.
right.
So
Actually,
stay
huh.
focused, learn from everywhere.
Great. Actually, I already failed three failures before starting startup Bazaar, right? Three failures in a row, and then I was like, नहीं ये नहीं होना चाहिए था. Then I started again कि नहीं, this time, right? We'll go in the right direction. Then I did this all of it 2 years ago. Actually, great journey. So founders, take the note of also this closing note, and thank you, Rohit, for sharing the value with our community, right? They will really love it. They will really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Akash, for having me over here with you and all the founders over here. Thank you.
Thank you.